Namibia and South Africa. Only 2 countries to go, I said to Nate as we waited for our passports to be checked. I'm starting to feel like we're going to make it. Nate looked less confident. Namibia's just desert, right? I said. We've done that. And then South Africa's easy. We've got to take the Trans-Kalahari Highway into Windhoek, he said. The most dangerous road in Africa. And then I don't think there's much paved surface until Cape Town. Oh, good, I said. Apart from that, though. Oh, yeah, no problem. Although Namibia is hot. The most dangerous road in Africa is quite an accolade, but the Trans-Kalahari did not disappoint. It was a single-lane highway with a speed limit of 120 kilometres an hour and no hard shoulder. No one cycles on it, so the truck drivers do not even look for bikes on the road. And most of the time, even if they do see you, they don't stop. In scenes reminiscent of Terminator 2, huge black rigs approached Nate and I from behind, sounded their horns loudly, and then careered straight for us at high speed. The only way to avoid being crushed to death was to throw our bikes off the road and jump out of the way. On a large patch of desert, this was fine, but on the hills outside of Windhoek, with steep curves and blind bends, it was almost suicidal. We made it, just, although I was a nervous wreck by the end. Nate bought me a strong beer and some ice cream. Any excuse. Windhoek was an opulent oasis of bars, hotels, and dodgy money, which meant a soothing drink or eight was never far away. We tucked into beer, Jägermeister, and pork knuckles in a German restaurant called Joe's Beer House and toasted to staying alive. Any excuse once again. The next day we cycled sore-headedly out of the city, and as promised, the paved road quickly ran out. We were back on the dirt and the sand for a grind through the Namib Desert and the most stunning stretch of the ride. The Namib is the oldest desert in the world and one of the most beautiful places on earth. The white gravel of the road contrasts with pristine golden sand dunes and large rocky edifices that glow in amber light. The sky was perfect blue and nothing moved aside from the occasional zebra or antelope. Here was my dream of cycling through Africa and perhaps my dream for life. After a few days, we reached Sestrium, a small outpost on the side of the most spectacular dunes in the desert. I had a drink at the bar, then spent the rest of the night with another bout of gastroenteritis. The next day, we took a bouncy jeep ride to the biggest of all the dunes and climbed up to watch the sunrise. The desert ebbed and flowed on the horizon, igniting orange in the morning light. It was a sight to reinvigorate any lost energy. The desert also meant that we were out of malaria country, so the next morning I was able to start the day without taking any drugs for the first time in 3 months, aside from a large cup of caffeine-heavy coffee. The landscape became ever more beautiful by the day, a world of rippling sand and monolithic rocks. It was like riding into pre-human existence, old and wise, with ingrained knowledge of Homo sapiens, dinosaurs, and the creation of life somewhere deep in the orange sandstone. A truly spiritual experience. At our last desert campsite, I sauntered back to my tent in the middle of the night and saw Nate about to go to bed. Before zipping up his tent, he stopped and took a long look at the stars Then, happy with the world once again, opened up his sleeping bag and went to sleep. It was that night that I understood what this journey was all about. Not love of exercise, or pushing myself, or trying to find a different life. It was about finding love for someone and realising how happy that could make me feel. I didn't think I was sexually attracted to Nate, and I didn't think he felt this way about me either. But I knew at this moment I could go anywhere and do anything with him, and I would be perfectly happy. I was certain he felt the same way too. The final 700 miles of the trip began on a South African highway, but due to police recommendations for our safety, we were quickly led onto a dirt road and back into the wilderness. The idea of South Africa as an urban metropolis quickly dissipated, and we were soon in scrubland more barren than any so far. It felt good to be away from the cars, but the sand and dirt were physically breaking us with every pedal. The next morning, spirits were low. Our tour leader told us nothing would change, and if anything, the roads were going to get worse. The highlight of the day is a graveyard, she said, if you managed to see it. We were cycling through Bushman land, an area north of the Great Karoo. It was a place noted for being even more desolate and arid than its surroundings, which was quite an achievement. There was one reserve, Valputs. However, this was a reserve in the same way Chernobyl is a reserve. It's where South Africa dumps its nuclear waste. Were there animals actually living here? I'm not sure I would have liked to have run into them if there were. Nate and I cycled as best we could, pushing our way through the sediment, carefully negotiating gravel slopes and slogging through bogs of sand. The heat was oppressive again, and there was little to talk about apart from how much we weren't enjoying our time. At one point, around 10 kilometres from camp, Nate stopped behind me. I could hear him shouting, but I was 50 yards ahead and didn't particularly want to listen. I should have turned back, but instead I rode on, desperate to make it into camp. I finished, then Nate cycled in half an hour after me, cut and bruised from falling off. His face told me that the pain was okay, but that the worst injury was being let down by his best friend. I look back on this with shame now, but I can see how it happened. I had to keep going, otherwise I felt like I wouldn't make it. The terrible selfishness of the endurance athlete. Later, Nate and I made up, and he conceded that in the opposite circumstances, he might well have done the same thing. The next morning, we were cycling back through the dirt together. It was hard once again, but our spirits were renewed, and we made it through without incident. It was then a steep climb through the Cederberg Mountains, a range of dramatic dark peaks around 200 kilometres north of the coast. They were mainly sandstone, but as the altitude increased, there were bursts of blues, greens and reds, trees and wildflowers sprouting celebratory out of the rocks. For one last time, the mountain goats could leap up the passes and descend in their usual tentative manner, aware that it was too close to the end to fall off now. As we rode further south, the colours turned to autumnal golds and browns, and the route descended through orchards, vineyards, and tiny villages straight out of Don Quixote. The world was alive and benevolent once again. We made it to Malmesbury, and all of a sudden we're only an 80-kilometre ride away from Cape Town. Somewhere in the distance was the ocean, not seen since all those days ago on the east coast of Egypt. My bike, the Duchess, was making more clunks and clangs than a marching band in an earthquake. I just hoped it would make it through the last stretch. The final day was a mix of excitement and sadness. Everyone wanted to finish, but no one wanted the trip to end. The cycling bubble had been one of perfect liberation. No bills, no work, no responsibilities, which only left two things to discover: Africa and ourselves. Whilst I was experiencing the former, it was amazing how much of the latter came out. Hard cycling, sickness, heat, shared toilets, exhaustion, meant we had to express ourselves with no barriers. What came out was who we were, warts and all. For me, that felt like a pretty good person. I wanted to make sure I stay like this for good. We reached Cape Town, and my bike creaked like an arthritic kangaroo. I had a cycle helmet from Malawi, stitches in my arm from Kenya, a scar from the spider bite in the Serengeti, stomach ravaged by Ethiopian bugs, and skin caked by the Sudanese sun. Africa was a part of us now, every fucking inch, and would stay with us forever. Nate and I cycled together into the harbour. We held our bikes aloft in front of Table Mountain, and then embraced for a long time. We survived, I said. We made it together, he said. I couldn't have done it without you. I wouldn't have wanted to do it without you. We broke apart, and then took a moment together to think about all that we had done to reach this point. I don't want this to end, I said silently. Neither do I. As long as I'm with you, I can go anywhere. As long as I'm with you, I feel like I'm home. The ocean lapped rhythmically against the soft white sand. Shall we go and find a bar? Said Nate. I think Simon and the Duchess could do with a rest. We got back on our bikes and rode together into the city. A new adventure about to begin.